Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Small Talk. This is our third episode and we're going to go straight into the topic, which is living with your in-laws.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again. To start off with, actually, I would like to say thank you to all the love and support you've shown in the first two episodes. Today's subject is all about living with the in-laws. Now, obviously, I have a lot more to say about this aspect than you do. So I think actually you should talk about me moving in with your family and how you found out first.
Okay, so I think from having actually conversation with my parents before marriage and having conversation with you, obviously after we had our nikah done, one of the things that I was always told by my parents is that obviously remember the adjustment period the adjustment is a lot more for the girl than it is for the guy and his family, because we're used to getting, we're only kind of getting used to living with one extra person, whereas the girl or the bride themselves, they're getting used to living with maybe an entire family, maybe 5 or 6 people, new people. So it's always more difficult, and so it's more important for us to be kind of patient at that point with, let's say, just everyday life routines and stuff like that. And sometimes initially it does go out the window a little bit, but that's something that you have to be patient about, because like I said, it's more adjustment on the girl's side than it is for a guy's side. So for me, I didn't find it to be too much of an adjustment in the first couple of months, and obviously even now then obviously, but
No, but
yeah.
even with that, you say you didn't have that much to adjust to. But like, how did me moving in, invading your space, like I took over your room pretty much, didn't I, as well? Like, how did you find all of that stuff? Because as much as it maybe wasn't so much of a difficulty for you, it was still having someone additional in your life.
I didn't find that to be that difficult. I thought it was quite easy transition for me. I didn't think it was. I mean, yeah, obviously I was now sharing a room and space with you, but I didn't find that to be that's your kind of taking over my space, and I don't really have control of my space or whatnot. That was quite easy transition for me. Maybe it's different for different people, but I thought that was a quite easy transition for me. I didn't feel like, oh, you know what, I don't have my space anymore. I can't be in my room by myself or whatnot. It was actually probably better that now that I was sharing a room or space with you. But I did understand, obviously, for my parents. Again, I don't think they found it too difficult, because obviously my brother and my sister-in-law had lived with us previously, so they were used to having a daughter-in-law uh in the house, so it wasn't that difficult. I think but for me, I just had to make sure, obviously, that when I did, I think in the main adjustment is probably spending time. I had to make sure, obviously, I'm not just completely spending time with my parents all the time. I'm spending time with you, and vice versa. I wasn't spending too much time with you. I was spending time with my parents, because that was important, and it was good. It was important to keep that balance. Yeah, and I think that was probably the biggest kind of, I guess, the adjustment was ensuring that I was spending time equally between, and not just spending too much, not necessarily too much. There's nothing wrong with it, but I also gave time to my parents, and that was important to me.
Which I agree with, because it's obviously, it would be different if you neglected them just because you now have a wife with you. And, yeah, right?
Yeah, I think one thing my dad did say, and this was a very long time ago, and I didn't understand it back then. He said it to me when I was about, I think, really young, probably about in my teens. But I didn't understand it back then. But he said to me, when you're a child, you crave your parents' attention. But as you grow up, your parents take that role of becoming a child, where they crave your attention. And I see that sometimes where, parents want to speak to you, or my parents want it. Sometimes when I come from work or something like that, dad or mum wants to ask me questions, and I'm sometimes tired. But at those moments, sometimes I've neglected, of course. And I don't know if anyone can say they've never. Maybe some can, but those things are quite important. And now I kind of understand what he means by that, where people obviously, when you've grown older, or when the kids have become older, the parents are the ones that are actually craving their attention more, because they want to know what you've done in the day. They want to know, they want to spend some time with you. They maybe want to ask some questions and stuff like that. So that's, I think, very important for me to know, and that's why I think it hits you more when knowing that obviously this is what he meant back in, let's say, when I was like 13 or 14 years old, when he said that to me, or even older. I don't remember how old I was, but when he said it to me, I didn't understand it, but now I get it. And that's why I think it's so difficult sometimes just to be, engrossed in your life. You go to work, you come home, and then you want to just relax. But at the same time, they've been home, whether it's your wife, whether it's your mum or your dad, but they've been home all day, maybe, you know, just being home and, doing housework or whatnot. And when you've come home, they actually want to spend time with you. But because you're tired, and sometimes it is very easy to fall into that trap. And that's why I think I've always tried to, and I don't think I've done it, amazing job of it, but I think I've tried to at least spend a bit of time once I've come from work with my parents, whether it's just watching TV, or whether it's just talking about what happened at work or eating. I've tried to do it, yeah, but I think I understand that quote, what he said to me before, but I understand it more now. And I think if we were to, let's say, have children in future, when we, when our kids grow up, when we do have kids, I wouldn't ever want it to be in a position where maybe, where our kids feel like, when they've grown older and we're craving that attention, that they feel like, we haven't got time for them. And it's important. I think that's why, for me to now, invest time with my parents. And if hopefully when our kids do grow up and they see us doing it, they will feel the same way as well. And maybe we can have that same conversation with our children. But that's just how I kind of feel about that. What about yourself? Or how do you feel about living with in-laws?
Well, going back to when we actually first started talking, obviously in our first meeting, you did tell me you wanted to live with your parents and how I felt about that. And for me, actually, I grew up knowing that was a possibility. And let's not forget that women are allowed to say they don't want to live with their in-laws. We're in our right to say we want our own space. But I personally actually liked the idea of living with my in-laws because I wanted to build that relationship with them. I wanted to build that bond with them that hopefully eventually when we did move out, or when we do move out, we've already built that long-lasting relationship where I can come to them for anything, they can come to me for anything. And so when you did bring that subject up, I was like, yeah, I would love to live with my in-laws. Because for me, I just feel like I saw it with a lot of my family members where they do have great relationships with their in-laws. And actually, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. I know there's a lot of negative connotations around that, and a prime example of that is Bollywood dramas that you're watching that show the mother-in-law doesn't like the daughter-in-law and is causing grief, and it's pretty much every drama out there. It just reflects really badly on how the mother-in-law either doesn't like the daughter-in-law, or and so actually growing up, that made me even question whether I wanted to live with my in-laws, because watching all of those dramas, we know it's fiction, but to some extent there is some truth to it as well. And so I was thinking to myself, maybe, I'm going to be one of those ones that doesn't have a good relationship with her mother-in-law, or, I don't get along with my father-in-law. And it was a general worry regardless of who my spouse was going to be. I think I was always going to be worried about what the living situation was going to be like. And I think a lot of girls actually have that worry, is if they do, find their potential spouse, will they have to live with their in-laws? But I actually do recommend living with the in-laws. I think it's a great way to bond and get to know one another. As much as we like to say, this is a partnership between husband and wife. The reality is, in our community, you know, we hold our parents and we hold family to a high level. So why wouldn't we want to make sure we have a good bond and relationship with them as well? Right?
Yeah, makes sense. But I think one of the things
Go on.
I know for certain about my parents, and I'm sure your parents feel the same way, is that whoever we bring in, whoever I was to get married to, or you were to get married to, I think our parents' main, not main concern. I think our parents' thing was we have to treat them. I know my dad and my mum said it, that yes, she's somebody else's daughter we're bringing in, but we're gonna treat her like our own daughter. Otherwise, if we start treating like she's an outsider, even though she's married to our son, or if we don't treat her like our own daughter, or how we treat our own son, then she's gonna feel like she's an outsider.
And that's exactly one of the other issues, and one of the other worries that people do have. A lot of women do have that worry that, because we're coming into the home, are we actually really accepted in that home though, by the family, by the spouse, by the parents, by the siblings? Because it's a lot harder, for us to adjust to that period. But I guess if you see little things happening here and there at home, it makes you think maybe you're not really part of that home. When I moved in with your family, there was a learning curve to it. Not in the sense that I had a lot to learn. It was just, respecting their boundaries, understanding their routine, not overstepping. And, even for mum, watching mum work and just knowing what her routine was like, because I didn't want her to think that I was trying to take over or anything like that as well. And so it was just that for the first few months of actually not just their routine, your routine as well, actually, because living with you was also something I needed to understand as well. And seeing how all of you interacted together was also something to adjust to. But alhamdulillah, your parents have never made me feel like I was an outsider coming in. I think we kind of were at ease with each other quite early on. I honestly don't remember a time feeling like, oh my gosh, this isn't my home. Because even the first night, your parents were so welcoming, and I never really felt like I was someone coming in interrupting their lives. It was more them welcoming me with open arms, and I really, really appreciated that because, I guess, growing up watching these Bollywood movies and dramas, you'd see so much negativity around, the in-law doesn't like the in-laws don't like the daughter, and they treat her terribly and things like that. And that was a concern for me because obviously you want to hopefully see that things can work out, but at times there can be clashes.
Yeah, but I think that's a concern for all girls, whether before they go into any household. I think that's always a concern, and it's always a concern for parents as well. But it's just obviously so that will always be a concern for every girl before she gets married. I don't think that.
Yeah, but all equally, obviously, she has the right to say no as well if she doesn't want to live with her in-laws.
Yeah,
and sometimes actually, reality is sometimes for some couples it works better not moving in with the in-laws. They might actually find that even both the parents might want there to be some boundaries, and actually living separately works far better for their relationship. Now, alhamdulillah for us, it's worked really well. And actually we had lockdown in that period, and actually lockdown was was a time where we were all at home together 24/7. And honestly, if we could handle lockdown together, we could handle anything together. And in that time, actually, me and your dad We actually started doing cooking together, which was really fun. You know, your dad, I was actually the one to invite me to do those things with him. And I just thought it was really nice that your dad was thinking of ways to include me in things. And, you know, we made loads of different dishes together. And yeah, it was just a really fun thing to do. And it made us bond and become closer together. I really love the fact that we were able to do that, because I don't know if we would have done it on normal circumstances. I don't know how likely it would have been that me and your dad would have ended up cooking together. But, you know, we had a lot of time on our hands, and actually, obviously, I was just generally doing cooking anyway. But it was different this time around because your dad was the one to ask me to help him cook something, and it was really nice. But alhamdulillah, the reality is, you know, as much as people like to say there's a lot of negativity around living with the in-laws, you know, I'm actually very pro living with the in-laws, alhamdulillah. You know, I think you just gotta maybe give it a little time. And of course there's gonna be an adjustment period, you know, they're welcoming you in, you're trying to figure out how to balance that with, you know, being a wife and being a daughter-in-law. But, you know, you can make it work. You can definitely make things work. And I guess the biggest thing actually is you should all equally want to make that work. You know, I think it wouldn't have worked as well if your parents, you know, didn't treat me like a daughter. You know, I think that was the important part as well, because they understood that I was coming into their home, having lived with my family and being comfortable a certain way. And they also treated me as they did their own daughter. And, you know, I remember even like for my dad as well, that was like one thing he was worried about, because, you know, you do hear horror stories, and yes, you know, not every relationship works out with living with the in-laws, but my dad was kind of worried about that aspect, because, you know, you never know what could happen. Yeah, so for my dad, it was kind of a concern because, you know, for him, he was thinking, you know, I've looked after my daughter all these years and she's about to leave my home and go into someone else's home. He was thinking, you know, inshallah, I hope they do look after my daughter the way I would want them to, the way I have all these years. You know, that's a thing that's quite normal for fathers to worry about, because it is so different living with your own family and moving in with your in-laws. But that doesn't mean it should be that different, because I actually haven't found it to be that different. You know, whether I'm here with my in-laws or I go back home, I get treated equally the same. I don't feel like when I go home to my mum and dad, there's massive differences in how they treat me versus how my in-laws treat me. And I think that's the main thing. I think if your parents had treated me differently, I would have felt it more when I go home to my own parents. But alhamdulillah, they've never made me feel like that, and they've never made me feel like I wasn't part of the family, that I wasn't their daughter. And, you know, I think for me, that was so important to establish those relationships and those bonds with them, because, you know, like I say, we have each other's backs, we're supporting each other.
It also makes it so much more easier to, let's say, communicate any issues if we were to, for example, were to have, or any advice that we would need. It's so much easier to now go up to them and go, "Oh, this is what we're dealing with," or, you know, "This is what we're thinking. What do you think?" It makes it so much easier to communicate those things. It makes it so much easier to talk to them about these things. Even, you know, even with your parents, right? Because obviously, alhamdulillah, your parents have treated me like, you know, I'm one of their own sons, you know. So it makes that so much more easier. It makes approaching them so much more easier.
Yeah, having said that, obviously, alhamdulillah, with us, you know, we've not had any major fights or anything like that. But I assume if we did and we were really, really struggling to figure it out on our own, we could easily approach our parents about it. We could easily, you know, be like able to share with them and confide with them without it being they're on your side and my family's on my side. It's, you know, they want our relationship to work just as much as we do. And I think that's the main other thing that I really like about having lived with them. Even if we were to go with our relationship struggles, they wouldn't be like on your side or my side. You know, they're in it as well to make sure our relationship is successful. And, you know, a lot of people will say, actually, well, you should keep your, like, fights and arguments private from your family because, you know, everyone's always got an opinion. You're right, you know, to some extent, there's things that we might not share with our in-laws or, like, with my parents. But I think we understand as well that for us to have to go to them, we must be in serious issues that we can't resolve ourselves. But I like the idea that, you know, if we really, 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 really couldn't have figured it out ourselves, that we know getting our parents involved would actually, inshallah, hopefully be able to mend whatever it is that we're going through. And I think that's really important, though.
But I think even general advice, like for example, if you wanted to, if you were to, if you wanted to go and buy a house or something, their opinion is very important, right? They can guide, maybe if they have experience in it, they can guide us towards making the good or correct decisions, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not just about sometimes if you're in problematic situations where they can help us. It's just general life advice and general life decisions that they can help you with, that you don't necessarily think you might need advice, but you actually do.
Having said that, actually, life advice, I remember actually, I think 2 years into our relationship, I did ask your dad if they wanted us to move out. I think me and your dad have such a good bond and such a good relationship that I was able to ask him that question without feeling awkward about it. Because, I was worried maybe we were overstepping and not overstepping. I was worried maybe we were overstaying our welcome. But in actuality, your dad just laughed at me and said, no, we like having you around. Like, we enjoy having both your company. And, when I was going to my parents' house a lot after we got married, your dad would always call me up and be like, when are you coming home? Because it's always just nice that he really cared about having me around. And I think that was also lovely to hear that, reality is, as much as, I'm loving living with my in-laws, that I didn't actually want to move out, but I asked it because I felt like it was just out of courtesy to see maybe, are we taking it too far by living with them for so long? Did they want their own space and we just didn't realize that they wanted their own space? And so that's why I asked your dad the question, because I really wasn't sure. I mean, obviously we all get along so well. It was almost like maybe they wouldn't actually tell us if there was a bother. But then your dad was like, no, absolutely, we love having you guys here. And I thought that was so lovely that me and him were able to have that communication together. A lot of people would say that maybe I should have asked you to ask him first. But
I mean, if you're comfortable asking, why not?
Well, why do I need you to ask him that question if I've got such a good relationship with your dad? And I think that goes to show that, really how far our relationship has come, because, I think a lot of people would actually say, no, your husband should have been the one to ask your father-in-law that question. Maybe you asking is a bit too over the top. Maybe you asking that was you overstepping a boundary there. But no, your dad didn't mind it. I didn't find it awkward asking him that. And I guess that really proves that in that time our relationship had grown really well. Honestly, there's so much I could say about why I love living with my in-laws and why I do think there are benefits to it. Of course, every individual person will have different experiences, and it all does depend on obviously if the in-laws are also willing to put that effort in and make sure that relationship is good.
So, my parents said, why would we not treat her, like our own daughter? Because ultimately, if we treat her differently, or if we treat her like an outsider, then, it causes more issues for the son and the daughter-in-law's relationship, as well as, the son and the parents' relationship as well. So, so they were very, clear and understanding of that, is that, we want to treat my wife like their own daughter, so that she doesn't feel like she's left out, or she doesn't feel like, she's an outsider, which was really important to them. And I think it was really important to me and us. I think, and it helped us kind of, or helped you settle in a lot more easier than what it would have been, right?
Yeah, so, do you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I do wonder why there are some in-laws that don't feel that way and want to actually welcome their daughter-in-law like that, because it's really weird that, I guess, of course, living with someone is a lot harder than it looks. And actually, I can understand where there might be a lot of differences in, like, for example, with, let's say, for cooking, for example, there could be differences with how I cook versus how your mum cooks, because certain, regions, they do things differently, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that should become an issue, right? I think it's all about understanding and being fair about, if your mom has made food like this for X amount of years, what's wrong with me just learning to pick it up as well?
No, but it's also, I think, understanding that obviously same goes for the other way as well. My mum understanding obviously that you cook in a slightly different way. But that's what I'm saying. So alhamdulillah, for us that wasn't an issue. But I think for some people that can become an issue.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is, like, it's just these little things, and I think that's the other big thing to remember: a compromise. It's, for it to work, and you and your husband might not be in the capacity to move out because of financial issues, and obviously right now it's just shockingly difficult as it is and expensive as it is, that perhaps sometimes just compromising is all you really need to do and be able to push forward for that. So I guess it's just knowing your boundaries. And I think another thing is actually making sure to communicate well with your husband if you are going through issues. I think sometimes what can happen is, if you are going through too many difficult times with your in-laws, you could maybe bottle it up too much to a point where it's too hard for you to approach your husband about it or try and figure out a solution to the issues. And there's so much more we can actually discuss with the living with the in-laws aspect, and actually how it's worked for us. But I think for today's episode, we'll leave it at this. And, definitely follow our social media accounts to see what's coming next. Or maybe there's a specific question you want to ask us, because we will be able to hopefully eventually answer any questions you have. Yeah, I think that's it from us.
Oh, we'll see you on the next episode of Small Talk.